On today's Kwibuka podcast episode, we hear about massacres at Nyabisindu Church in Muhanga district that wiped out Tutsis that were hiding in and around the church. The episode also details killings at Bisesero, where thousands of Tutsis from different parts of Kibuye and Gikongoro had fled and managed to fight off attacks until Friday 13th, May 1994, when attacks were much stronger and much more heavily armed than they had previously been. On 12th May 1994, massacres of Tutsis at ADEPR Nyabisindu Church, Muhanga. The massacres of Tutsis in Nyamabuye commune intensified on April 23, 1994. Thereafter, Tutsis from the surrounding area started to flee to the ADEPR Nyabisindu Church, located in Nyamabuye sector, Muhanga district. Some Tutsis had taken refuge at the church, but there were also Kivuye and Nyakyonga refugees who were camping there. The latter had fled from some of the war zones in the communes of Jumba Prefecture, including the Kivuye commune. Hence, refugees at Nyabisindu became so many, and some of them were living in the nearby primary school owned by the ADEPR Church. Church officials categorized the refugees based on their ethnicity. One day, Pastor Sagahutu and another lady sat in front of the church. One was in charge of counting Hutus and the other in charge of the Tutsis. Hutu refugees from Kivuye and Nyakyonga, as well as other refugees from Kigali, were taken to a better place, while the Tutsi refugees were mistreated. Among the Tutsi refugees, some were from various parts of Gitarama, like Chibirira. The Hutu refugees helped to call the killers who slaughtered the Tutsi refugees. Women and girls were raped, while children were called to assist in the abhorrent acts. Some of the children were also forced to take part in the transgressions. Before the extermination date, the prefect of Gitarama Prefecture, Major Ukurikiyeyezu Jean Damascene, and the sous-prefet Massacres Antoine, together with ADEPR head pastor Nyandwi Enoch, ordered that the Tutsi refugees should be taken to a place called Misizi, because they intended to kill them far from the city. They escorted the refugees. The killers accompanied them with traditional weapons including axes. One vehicle was in front and the other behind, all the way to Gitarama town. Along the journey, killers would kill some and dump them in the drainages. When the refugees arrived in Gitarama town, at the market, they rioted and refused to go to Misizi. They rather tried to flee towards Kabgayi by force. Some of them were killed, but others managed to flee and reached Kabgayi. They were the first refugees to be housed at the CND in Kabgayi. Because of the awful life at CND and the constant attacks by Interahamwe in which many succumbed, some of the refugees decided to return to ADEPR Nyabisindu in absolute secrecy. Consequently, on May 12, 1994, Interahamwe militia attacked them with painted faces, wearing dried banana leaves, armed with weapons like knives, axes, machetes and clubs, arrived on site and slaughtered all the Tutsis who were at the church. On that day, around 2 p.m., prisoners came to help dispose of the corpses, throwing them into the surrounding pits. They dragged them down, with some still breathing, while others were still asking for forgiveness. The rest were praying or just crying out. As the killings were underway, at the ADEPR church, women and girls were being put aside to be raped later. Various tools were used to torture them. These included bottles, sharpened sticks, and banana tree buds. 121 victims of the genocide killed at ADEPR Church, Nyabisindu, are buried at the Nyabisindu Genocide Memorial. The killers and organizers of the Nyabisindu massacres included the prefect, Major Jean Damascene Ukurikiyeyezu, the sous-prefet, Massacres Antoine, Pastor Nsanzurwimo Joseph, the national spokesperson of ADEPR, lives in Belgium, Pastor Nyandwi Enoch, Pastor Gatere Simon Pierre, Upfuisoni Marie Gorette, who was a member of parliament and Secretary General of the UNSODC party created by ADEPR authorities. She lives in Belgium. Pastor Sagahutu Jean, who led Nyabisindu Parish and lives in Zambia. Pastor Munyeboyi Amon, also living in Zambia. Pastor Kagurano Gerald. Pastor Gakwere Cyprien, who lives in Uganda. Pastor Utaziruwanda Leon, who lives in Tanzania. Pastor Nkubito Noel Nzigira, who was a staff at Gitarama Prefecture. Andre, also called Rurugwinda. Nirema Theodomir, who was the counselor. Rwajekare, Tito, and others. On 13th May 1994, massacres of Tutsis in Bisesero, former Kibuye Prefecture. The hills of Bisesero are located in the former Gisovu and Gishita commune, former Chibuye prefecture. The hills were covered by a wide dense forest. There were people living on the feet of the hill, and there were also pastures for cattle. Currently, Bisesero borders 4 sectors of Karongi district, namely Mubuga, Gishita, Rwankuba, and Tkumba. Bisesero was home to approximately 60,000 Tutsis, and the area is known for the self-defense manifested by the Tutsi during the genocide against the Tutsi. Tutsi from different parts of Chibuye and Gikongoro prefectures, including Rubengera, Rutsiro, Rwamatamu, Gisovu, Gikongoro, Gishita, and Gitesi, decided to flee to Bisesero because it was home to several families of Tutsis. And since 1959, they are known for their heroic resistance against the massacres that targeted them. Those who took refuge in Bisesero were believing that if they joined their efforts, they would fight and defeat the killers. Thanks to their collective resistance, killers had failed to neither burn Tutsis' houses nor seize any of their cows. On April 7, 1994, when the news about Habyarimana's death went viral, the killers started murdering Tutsis in some areas of Chibuye and Gikongoro. The survivors fled to Bisesero, though the Tutsis of Bisesero had also left their homes to Moira and Gitwa Hills, hoping to be safe there. Other Tutsis who fled to Bisesero were those who survived from other areas, including Mubuga Church, Rwamatamu, Gitwa, Gatwaro Stadium, Kayove, among other places. Resistance of Tutsis who fled to Bisesero against the attacks. Tutsis spent a long time confronting the killers and retaliating. Some of the Hutu attackers were killed, and Tutsis confiscated their guns, though they did not have skills to use them for their own defense. Tutsi self-defense lasted for long, though they were using sticks, stones, spears, bows against killers with firearms. Tutsis from Gisovu and Rwankuba, the northern part of Bisesero, fought from Moira Hills, while others rallied on Gitwa Hill in the south of Bisesero. They were committed to make sacrifices and bravely fight Hutu attackers and kill some of them. Hence, Tutsis defeated the killers in various attacks, seized their weapons, and the latter became weak and ran away. The Interahamwe attack started on April 7, 1994, and the Tutsis of Bisesero would come together to identify where the attacks were from in a bid to prevent them from entering Bisesero. When the killers came in the morning, Tutsis gathered on top of the hill and assaulted them with stones. And at the same time, when they ran out of stones, they would all go down the hill at once and physically confront the killers, obstruct them from killing women and children and their cows. Tutsis would resist until killers get tired and run away. In addition, Tutsis who felt weak would join their comrades on the other hills to join hands and ensure their victory. Attacks were from various places that included Gisovu commune, Rwamatamu, Ngoma, Mubuga commune, and Gishita commune, but killers were from all the communes of Chibuye prefectures and others from some communes of Gikongoro. Tutsi fighters were led by Birara Aminadab, his son Zigira, Sejikware, Habiyambere, and Paul Bitega. Unfortunately, they were all killed later. Tutsis who survived in Bisesero include Karamaga Simeon, Aaron Gakoko, and Vensa Munyaneza. As Tutsis in Bisesero had been fighting the Interahamwe for days, through the end of April, officials including former Chibuye prefect Kaishema Clement, ATL, wrote a letter to Edward Karemera, the former Minister of Interior, who was from Chibuye. They were seeking his support to be able to expel Tutsis, whom they called Inhotanyi, from Bisesero. Karemera pledged to seek help from the former army chief in Gisenyi, Colonel Anatole Nsengiyumva, with whom they had started negotiating about that support. From May 1, 1994 to May 12, 1994, there were no further attacks in Bisesero. Tutsis started taking rest, thinking there'd be no more attacks. Some started to return to their normal activities such as agriculture, animal husbandry, among others. However, killers had taken recess to plan other deadly attacks. They spent 2 weeks fine-tuning the plans to exterminate Tutsis who had taken refuge in Bisesero. The Friday of May 13, 1994 was the first day of relentless attacks on Bisesero. Contrary to the previous days, attackers included even soldiers, the Interahamwe from different parts, and prominent killers from Bugarama in Cyangugu, Gisenyi, Ruhengeri, and Gikongoro. The top leaders had guns with them and included Ehezeri Nitegeka, former minister, Clement Kaishema, Chibuye prefect, Alfred Musema, director of Gisovu Tea Factory, Obed Ruzindana, a prominent businessman, and his brother Joseph Mahambara, Charles Sikubgabo, the mayor of Gishita commune, Alois Ndimbati, the mayor of Gisovu commune, Gerard Ntakirutimana, head of Mugonero Hospital, John Yusuf Munyakazi, chief of Interahamwe in Bugarama Cyangugu, among others. All of them were familiar with leading attacks against Tutsis in different parts of Kibuye and Cyangugu. The killer started on April 13, 1994, from 9 a.m. till 4 p.m. Government officials, soldiers and Interahamwe arrived in big numbers carried by Onatracom buses, trucks seized from killed Tutsis, colors trucks normally used in construction of activities of Kibuye-Gitarama Road, and other small vehicles. They started to kill Tutsis in Bisesero, on Muyira and Gitwa Hills, where they had taken refuge. Tutsis failed to fight back as usual and could not withstand the heavy weapons in the possessions of the killers. The killers attacked Tutsis while shouting, "Let us destroy them." They shot Tutsis, threw grenades at them, while other killers used traditional weapons. After a short time, bodies of children, women, and the elderly were scattered everywhere. The Bisesero, Tutsis from Bisesero, were hugely defeated and many of them were killed. More than 30,000 Tutsis were reported killed that day. The killings stopped around 5:30 p.m. on that day, and afterwards killers held a meeting at a place called Kuchapa between Gishita and Gisovo communes to plan how the killings would be carried out the next day. At that place, Eliezer Niyitegeka grabbed a Tutsi girl, stripped her of her clothes and raped her in front of other killers, and immediately threw her at the Interahamwe, who chopped her up. Again, the killers returned on May 14, 1994, and killed Tutsis. Less than 10,000 Tutsis survived that day. They started to hide in the bushes and running in the hills, trying to escape the Interahamwe, who were shooting and killing them gradually. Tutsis who were injured were hunted by dogs. The prominent perpetrators of the genocide in Bisesero were convicted. Others are still on the run. They include Karemera Edouard. He was sentenced to life imprisonment by the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and died in prison. Niyitegeka Eliezer. He was sentenced to life imprisonment by the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and died in prison. Ntakirutimana Elizefan. He was convicted of genocide crimes by the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Colonel Nsengiyumva Anatole. He was convicted of genocide crimes by the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Ntakirutimana Gerard. He was convicted of genocide crimes by the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Muhimana Mika. He was convicted of genocide crimes by the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and sentenced to life imprisonment. Mhambara Joseph. He was convicted of genocide crimes by the Dutch courts and sentenced to life imprisonment. Kaishema Clement. He was convicted of genocide crimes by the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and sentenced to life imprisonment. Musema Alfred. He was convicted of genocide crimes by the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and sentenced to life imprisonment. Ruzindana Obed. He was convicted of genocide crimes by the International Tribunal for Rwanda and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Munyakazi John Yusuf. He was convicted of genocide crimes by the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Furere Abel, former mayor of Rwamatamu commune. Segatarama Simon. He was councillor of Gitabura sector. Sebahire John was a police officer and died in Bisesero. Rutaganira Vincent. He was the councillor of Mubuga sector. Rukazamnyambi. He was a police officer from Rutsiro and died in Bisesero. Many perpetrators involved in the killings of Tutsis in Bisesero fled justice. They include Habimana Joseph, former councillor of Tkumba sector. He is suspected to be living in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Nzihonga Elize. He was a teacher in Gitaura sector. He lives in Congo forests. Musabyimana Pierre, an ex-FAR soldier from Gisovo sector. He is allegedly living in forest in Congo. Ndamaje, former secretary of Gisovo commune. He fled and never returned. Kaijema Alexis. He was the director of Iga Gisovo and currently lives in France. Kamiri, son of Mhamira, was a trader in Mubuga. He fled to Uganda. Twagirayezu Jean-Baptiste was sentenced by Gacaca. Ngerageze Dan, former deputy mayor of Gishita commune. Bugingo Joseph, former mayor of Gisovo commune. Father Twagirayezu Marcel, former parish priest of the Catholic parish of Mubuga. He fled to France. Bizimungu, ex-FAR soldier. Karibana Uzaya, former deputy mayor of Gishita commune. He fled after the genocide. Muhirwa Uziel, former advisor of Musenyi sector, among others. Sikubwabo Charles, he escaped justice and the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda issued an arrest warrant against him. Ndimbati Alois, he escaped justice and is wanted by the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. Thank you for listening to another episode of Kwibuka Podcast. As always, make sure you leave us a review, sharing what you like about the podcast, and share with others who would be interested in listening.